Her heart raced as she followed him to the park he often visited during the day. She hated that she felt the need to sneak around to find out what was going on. She was tired of the late-night messages and the calls he made from the bathroom. She would do anything to get a little bit of truth, but she feared that what she might discover would make her feel sick. Claire Reynolds was not the type to interfere in her husband Kyle's life. He had always treated her well, doing things that most of her friends said their husbands no longer did. But recently, he had been hiding things from her, leaving the house early to feed his birds and spending the rest of the day in the shed. Claire had always trusted him. They had been married for 5 years. However, when a friend told her where she had seen Kyle, Claire felt she had no choice but to investigate. Claire was 29 when she married Kyle Reynolds. He was the best thing that had happened to her, especially after the tough times she had faced. As a grad student trying to succeed in project management, Claire had dedicated herself to her career. But everything fell apart when she discovered a terrible secret. While in school, she had been dating a classmate when she found him with another woman, snuggled under the covers she had given him for Christmas. Heartbroken, she locked herself in her apartment, only leaving for class or groceries, until she met Kyle one rainy evening. Kyle was sweet and caring. He didn't try to force her into anything, choosing to be a shoulder to cry on when she needed one the most. As the months went by, Claire thought back to her original self. Kyle promised never to hurt her, and although Claire remained skeptical for a while, she eventually lowered her guard. So imagine how she felt when a friend told her what she had seen Kyle doing. When Kyle started taking an interest in bird feeding, Claire thought it was an excellent venture for him. Her husband rarely liked going outside, staying in his man cave whenever he was not with her or at work. He was also usually very reserved, but his whole demeanor shifted as he started feeding the birds that usually flocked to the nearby park. But Claire should have known that this would be the least of her worries. Like many things that push us into new behaviors and lifestyles, Kyle's interest in going to the park every morning hadn't been coincidental. He had a heated argument with Claire centered around her mom, who had pressured them to have a child. Claire and Kyle had agreed that they wouldn't have kids, and they had lived like this for 5 years before Claire's mom started asking questions. Kyle had told Claire he didn't like her taking her mom's side instead of his. He left that morning after the terrible fight, claiming he needed to clear his head. Frothing at the mouth, he banged the door behind him and jumped into his Jeep, taking the road to the park. When Kyle came home that evening, Claire thought he would still be angry with her. He usually held grudges, no matter how small. But this time, he was different. He didn't mention their fight and hugged her tightly as soon as she opened the door, asking what they were having for dinner. He didn't even realize he had been gone all day without calling or texting, and his hands were dirty and smelled like bird feathers. Claire felt she needed to find out what was going on. It wasn't like Kyle to leave things unresolved, especially after a big argument. He quickly took a shower and then sat in the kitchen while she cooked. Claire was confused. She couldn't remember the last time Kyle sat with her while she made dinner. When she tried to ask him what was wrong, it led to another messy fight. That night, Kyle slept with his back to her for the first time in years. Claire couldn't sleep, feeling lost and hurt. She wondered if she was overthinking things or if something was really wrong. Upset, she decided to check his social media followers, hoping to find any signs of another woman, but the app showed nothing unusual. Wanting to calm things down, she promised Kyle she would talk to her mom about their plans for children and apologize for her behavior, hoping everything would go back to normal. What started as a Saturday of going to feed the birds in the park resulted in 2 years of habit on Kyle's part. He never mentioned his fight with Claire, but he continued doing things he hadn't done in a long time, like accompanying her to the bookstore, buying random gifts, and taking her on date nights. But when Claire's friend told her where she'd seen Kyle and what he was doing, the pain that had almost wrecked Claire 2 years prior came back with a vengeance. If there had been a slight shift in Kyle's demeanor before, his behavior had now turned completely. He was rarely home, leaving without an explanation and returning in the evening, reeking of bird feathers and acting like everything was all right. He would answer calls in the bathroom and receive texts in the dead of night. Of course, he tried to mask everything with sweet actions, such as helping with dinner or taking Claire on late-night drives, but all he was doing was raising even more questions. After talking with her friend Lucy, Claire decided to follow Kyle one Saturday morning, hoping to uncover the truth. Lucy came along for support, and they took a route that kept them far from Kyle's Jeep. When they arrived at the park, Claire's heart raced as they spotted Kyle with a younger woman among the crows. Claire felt faint, recalling her past heartbreak and doubting Kyle's promise to never hurt her. She wondered if she was to blame for his actions, but Lucy reassured her that infidelity was a choice made by one person. As they watched Kyle laugh and caress the woman, Claire's anger boiled over, but Lucy urged her to wait until they returned home to confront him. Claire drove back, upset and feeling unworthy, and when she got home, her anger turned to sadness as she grappled with the betrayal. When Kyle first came into Claire's life, she didn't think she'd ever fall in love again. He was patient and gentle with her, helping her move past her heartbreak and getting her to believe in a brighter tomorrow. When she realized she liked him, she was taken aback by the revelation. But after telling him the truth, she learned he also wanted her. She could still remember the surge of happiness that overwhelmed her that day. It was then that he promised never to hurt her, and he had stood by those words for the last 5 years. Claire decided to confront Kyle and wouldn't wait for him to come home. She grabbed her keys and drove to the park, determined to hear his side if he was willing to throw away their relationship. Distraught, she sped down the road, not noticing the police cruiser following her until the sirens went off. Trembling with fear, she rolled down her window and explained her tears and speeding. The officer informed her he hadn't stopped her for speeding, but for not signaling. He offered to drive her to the park, and Claire accepted, feeling slightly calmer as she shared her pain with him. Her words caught in her throat as the park came into view. Claire's heart pummeled against her ribcage as her eyes landed on the woman again. Kyle was still sitting with her on the park bench, smiling as he ran his hand over her face, as if he were helping her with her makeup. The crows around them were calm, watching Kyle tear the fabric that held the vows and promises he had once made to Claire. "Is that him?" the officer asked, and Claire nodded as misery washed over her again. She threw the cruiser's door open, stepped into the park, and headed straight for Kyle. But as she got closer, she noticed something was off. The woman seemed to be holding a crow in her hands, which was odd because few people ever held crows. Claire also realized that Kyle had AirPods wedged deep into his ears. He was nodding and mumbling to some unheard music, not talking to the woman. As Claire approached, she realized the woman next to Kyle hadn't moved. She was just a statue. The birds around them also remained still, not reacting to Kyle's movements. "She's a statue," Claire whispered. Kyle noticed her and pulled out an AirPod, asking what she was doing there. Concerned, he asked if she was crying, but Claire insisted he was the one crying. He held her shoulders, his hands covered in paint and glue. After the officer left, Kyle explained he had been secretly taking sculpting lessons and had created the statue in birds. Claire felt relieved he hadn't betrayed her, but knew they still had much to discuss.